Okay, today we're going to talk about properties. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to say, I can identify and use the properties of numbers. Some of the properties we talk about today will be a review, but there are some new ones. So let's review the properties we already know. The first property we talked about this year was the commutative property. And we can illustrate this by thinking of Jacob, who has a 10-minute commute to school. While Jacob is commuting to school, he is traveling or moving from his house to school. Because the word commute means to travel. So in the commutative property, numbers will travel or move within the equation. The commutative property works with addition and multiplication, not subtraction or division. And we can see this by looking at the problem. 3 plus 4 is 7, which equals 4 plus 3, which also equals 7. 7 times 8 is 56, which equals 8 times 7, which is also 56. The second property we talked about this year is the associative property. And we can illustrate this property by thinking of Elena, who likes to associate with everyone and switches lunch tables often. Because in this property, the numbers change who they associate with, or they change groups, not their order. Just like the commutative property, the associative property works with addition and multiplication, not division and subtraction. If I know the order of operations, I would look at the associative property and do what's in the parentheses first. So let's look at the first problem. 3 plus the quantity 4 plus 5 equals the quantity of 3 plus 4 plus 5. If I were using the order of operations, I would first add 4 plus 5 to get 9, and 9 plus 3 is 12. If I look at the other side where the groupings have been changed, using the order of operations, I would add 3 plus 4 to get 7, and 7 plus 5 also equals 12. The third property we talked about was the distributive property. And we can illustrate this property by thinking of a teacher who distributes papers to the class. When she does that, each child or each student will have a copy of the paper. When we use the distributive property, we distribute the number outside the parentheses to each number inside the parentheses. Unlike the associative and the commutative property, the distributive property uses multiple operations. I have in the first problem 5 times the quantity 3 plus 4. Remember, if I have a number outside the parentheses without a symbol, that tells us that we need to multiply. So I'm going to distribute this 5 to each number inside the parentheses. And I would do 5 times 3 plus 5 times 4, which gives me 15 plus 20, or 35. I can do this with subtraction as well. I simply distribute the number outside the parentheses to each number inside the parentheses, and I would get 5 times 4 minus 5 times 3, or 20 minus 15, which equals 5. Let's look at a new property, the identity property. Watch what happens to the boy as he goes in one side of the box and out the other side. Nothing. In the identity property, you get what you started with. So, if I were using the identity property of addition, I could add any number in the whole world to 0, and I would get that number. 3 plus 0 equals 3. This property works with integers, fractions, and decimals as well. The identity of multiplication is slightly different. It says that any number I multiply by 1 will give me that original number. Again, the identity property of multiplication works with integers, fractions, and decimals as well. Now, in your summary, write an example of the identity property of addition and the identity property of multiplication, and circle your examples. The next property we're going to talk about is the zero property. The zero property tells us that anything we multiply by 0 will equal 0. 4 times 0 equals 0. 345 times 0 equals 0. Like the identity property, the zero property works with integers. -3 times 0 equals 0. It works with fractions. 1/5 times 0 equals 0. It works with decimals. 25/100 times 0 equals 0. Any number in the world that I want to multiply by 0 will give me a product of 0. In your summaries, write an example of the zero property and then circle or highlight it. The next thing we're going to talk about is additive inverse. An additive inverse tells us that when I add opposites, I will always get 0. Let's look at this on a number line. If I start at 0 and go to -3, then add a +3, or go in the positive direction 3 units, it'll take me back to 0. It works when I start with a positive number as well. When I start at 0 and go to +5, and then add a -5, or move in the negative direction 5 units, it takes me right back to 0. So adding opposites will always equal 0. Now, in your summaries, write an example of your own of additive inverse. Highlight or circle your example. Multiplicative inverse tells us that when I multiply reciprocals, and remember, reciprocals are when I take a fraction and take its flipped or flip of it, I will always get 1. And let's look at some examples. 4 times 1/4. Remember, 4 is actually a fraction. It can be written as 4 over 1 times 1 over 4, or 1/4. When I'm multiplying fractions, remember, I multiply the numerators, then I multiply the denominators, and simplify at the end. So 4 times 1 is 4, and 1 times 4 is 4. So I get 4/4, or 4 divided by 4, which equals 1. Let's take a look at another example. 2/3 times its reciprocal, or its flip, 3/2. I multiply the numerators, then I multiply the denominators, and I get 6 over 6. And 6 over 6, or 6 divided by 6, equals 1. Now in your summaries, write an example of your own to illustrate the multiplicative inverse. Don't forget to circle or highlight it. Now it's your turn. You can go back and watch any part of this video, or use your summaries to help you on the next screen. You will be given 10 problems. What you need to do is copy those equations into your notebooks and then name the property it's illustrating. Don't forget to WSQ in your notes and write each of these problems with their answers under your WSQ. Now copy each equation in your notes and label each with the correct property. Pause the video, or you can go back and watch any parts of this video that you need more help with.